It took me 11 weeks to see the pattern. 11 Sundays, 11 dinners, 11 Mondays where my husband could barely lift his head from the pillow. I am not a fast woman. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years behind the reference desk at the Millbrook Public Library in Iowa. I know how to be patient, I know how to be quiet. But that Monday night, sitting beside Howard's bed in the dark, watching the rise and fall of his chest, I counted back through every week since we had married, and something cold settled into my bones. Every time his nephew came to dinner, Howard got chess. Let me back up. Because to understand what I am about to tell you, you need to know how I ended up in that house in the first place. My name is Lenora. I have grey hair that I stopped fighting about 5 years ago, reading glasses I lose twice a day, and a daughter named Clara who is 35 years old and the only reason I have gotten out of bed every single morning for the past 2 years. Clara has kidney disease, the kind that does not get better on its own. When the doctor told us she would need a transplant, I nodded and held her hand and kept my face very still, the way I had learned to do when bad things happen. And then I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a pencil, and I wrote down every number I had. My savings, my pension, the small amount I got from selling my mother's jewellery the year before. I added it all up 3 times, as if the number might change if I stared at it long enough. It never changed, it was never enough. I sold my car. I picked up weekend shifts sorting donations at the church thrift store. I applied for every grant and assistance program I could find online. Clara told me to stop. She said, "Mum, I will figure it out, do not do this." But Clara has always been braver about her own suffering than I have ever been about mine. I could not simply watch. That was how I ended up at the Riverside Medical Gala in March of last year. A friend from church was volunteering and needed someone to help carry trays of pastries from her van to the reception hall. I wore my good black dress and my sensible shoes, and I carried those trays and I tried to be invisible. I was not invisible enough. Howard Davenport found me near the beverage table, refilling a tray of lemon squares. He was tall, even at 70, with silver hair and the careful posture of a man who had once stood very straight but was now tired of the effort. He was watching the room the way people watch things they used to enjoy, but no longer do. He asked if the lemon squares were any good. I told him honestly that I had made them myself, and yes, they were quite good. He laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one, and he said, "You are the only honest person I have spoken to tonight." We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about his late wife Adelaide, who had died 4 years earlier from complications related to kidney disease. When I said the word kidney, his face changed, just slightly, just enough. 2 days later he called me. He had asked my friend for my number. He apologized for that first. Then he told me something that made me sit down on my kitchen floor, with the phone pressed to my ear, unable to move. He had a heart condition, rare, aggressive. His doctors had given him somewhere between 4 and 6 months. He said it calmly, the way a person speaks about something they have already made their peace with. "I do not want to die alone," he said. "My nephew visits when it is convenient for him. That is all. I have money, and I have a house, and I have more days behind me than ahead of me, and I would like someone in the house who is actually there." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I would like to propose a marriage, not for love, for company, and if you agree I will pay for your daughter's transplant in full, no conditions, no strings, just a promise between 2 decent people." I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after we hung up. Was it right? I did not know. Was it honest? I told myself yes because we both understood exactly what it was. I prayed about it. I cried about it. I called Clara and did not tell her any of it because I knew she would say no, and I knew I could not bear to argue with her while she was sitting in a dialysis chair. In the end, I thought about her face in that hospital room and I said yes. We married quietly in April. A judge, 2 witnesses, a Tuesday afternoon. Howard wore a blue tie. I wore the same black dress from the gala. We shook hands after the ceremony, like 2 people closing a business deal, but he held my hand a beat longer than necessary, and I thought, this is a kind man. Howard kept his word immediately. Clara's medical team received authorization within the week. She called me crying so hard I could not understand her for a full minute. When she finally got the words out, I pressed my hand flat on the counter and breathed until I could speak. "I made a friend," I told her. The Davenport estate was in upstate New York, about 2 hours from the city, a large stone house on 50 acres, the kind of house that has its own name on old maps. Beautiful and a little cold, the way beautiful old things can be. The housekeeper, a steady woman in her 60s named Opal, showed me to my room and brought me tea without being asked, and seemed to understand immediately that I was trying very hard not to look overwhelmed. Declan arrived that first Sunday. Howard's nephew, his late wife Adelaide's sister's son. He was 46, handsome in a deliberate way, with the kind of smile that shows too many teeth. He brought flowers and a casserole dish and hugged Howard with great warmth, and then turned to me with considerably less. "So you are the new wife," he said pleasantly. "I am," I said. "Wonderful," he said, and he looked at me the way people look at furniture they do not like but cannot yet move. He had always been the Sunday dinner tradition, I learned. Every week he drove up from the city with food he said he had made himself, though Opal mentioned quietly that most of it came from a restaurant he held an ownership stake in. He managed several of Howard's business accounts and had, for years, been the closest thing Howard had to family. He was also, Howard mentioned once in passing, the sole beneficiary of the estate. The first dinner was fine, the second was fine. By the third, I noticed something I could not yet name. By the sixth, I had started keeping a small notebook. I am a librarian, I document things. Howard's health followed a rhythm. Saturdays he was at his best. He walked slowly, but he walked. He came to breakfast. He read the newspaper. We sat on the back porch in the afternoons and talked about books, and those hours were genuinely pleasant in a way I had not expected. Sunday afternoons, Declan arrived. Sunday evenings, Howard would seem tired but fine. Monday mornings, he would be worse, not just tired. Worse, his hands would shake. The colour went out of his face. He would spend Monday, Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday in bed, and the doctors would adjust his medications and say, yes, it is the condition progressing. By week 11, I had filled 2/3 of that small notebook. And on that Monday night in the dark, counting backward through every Sunday, I knew what I was looking at. If you are listening to this story right now, I need to ask you something. If you were in my place that night, sitting in the dark with a sick husband and a notebook full of dates and a feeling in your chest that something terrible was happening, what would you do? Would you confront them directly? Would you stay silent and wait? Leave me a comment and tell me, because what I chose to do next was the most important decision of my life. And make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what happens. Because I did not confront Declan, not yet, I did something smarter. The next Sunday, while Declan was arranging things in the kitchen, I went in under the pretense of getting a glass of water. I looked at what he had brought, sealed glass containers. A particular dark broth he always said was formulated specifically for Howard's heart, a thermos of what he called a wellness tea. Declan looked at me from across the counter. "Just checking if you need anything," I said easily. "I can set the table." He smiled. "No need, I have it all under control." I smiled back, and I filed that smile away in the notebook in my head. That week, I drove 40 minutes to a town where no one knew me and walked into an independent testing lab. I had saved a small amount of that broth from the previous Sunday, decanted quietly into a travel container I had told no one about. The lab technician asked no questions. I paid in cash and gave my cell phone number and drove home. It took 4 days to get the results. When the email arrived, I sat in my car in a parking lot and read it 3 times. The broth contained elevated levels of a compound not consistent with standard food ingredients. The lab flagged it and asked if I wanted them to escalate to a clinical consultation. I sat there for a very long time. Then I called Mr. Haskell. Howard had mentioned his personal attorney once, early in our marriage. The man who had handled his private affairs for over 20 years, entirely separate from the business lawyers Declan dealt with. I had quietly found his number in Howard's address book one afternoon and written it in the back of my notebook. Mr. Haskell answered on the 3rd ring. I told him everything. The 11-week pattern, the notebook with its dates and observations, the lab results. My suspicion about the will, and the fact that Howard had told me recently he intended to change it, to create a foundation in Adelaide's name for kidney disease research. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Mrs. Davenport, I need you to listen carefully. Do not confront Declan. Do not change your routine. Do not tell Howard yet, because if Declan suspects you know, things could move very quickly in a dangerous direction." "I understand," I said. "Come to my office Thursday," he said. "Bring the notebook and the lab report." I drove home and made dinner and sat across from Howard and talked about the book I was reading, and I felt like I was carrying something very heavy inside my ribs, but I kept my face still. 31 years behind a reference desk teaches you that. The following Sunday, Declan came again. Before dinner, while Howard rested upstairs, Declan found me in the sitting room. He sat down without being invited. He said I seemed quiet lately. He said he hoped I was settling in all right. It can be hard, he said, coming into a situation like this. Watching someone decline, it is important to be realistic. The doctors do not expect much more time. I looked at him steadily. Howard is a fighter, I said. Declan smiled. Of course he is. That night, after he left and Howard was sleeping, I set my phone to record and left it on the small table at the top of the stairs. I did not know if Declan would say anything worth keeping, but I had started holding on to every possible thread. I am a librarian. I do not discard things before I know I need them. I met with Mr. Haskell on Thursday. He was a small, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and the manner of someone who had seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. He looked at my notebook for a long time. He read the lab report twice. He was about to change his will, I told him. Howard told me himself. Most of it would go to the foundation. Adelaide died of kidney disease. He wanted to do something lasting in her name. Mr. Haskell set the report down. Declan is aware of this. Yes, I said. He looked at me over his glasses. You did the right thing coming here first. I have a contact at the county police. I would like to make a call. What happens now? I asked. We build the case properly, he said, so that when we bring it, there is no room to argue. For the next 2 weeks, I lived very carefully. I did not change how I spoke to Declan. I did not avoid him. I brought him coffee when he visited and asked about the drive up from the city and listened when he talked about himself, which he did at considerable length. I kept my notebook. I kept recording when he was in the house. But Howard kept getting worse. One Tuesday evening, he collapsed in the hallway. I heard it and ran. He was conscious, but his face was the color of old paper. I called the ambulance and rode with him and held his hand, and in the emergency room, when they asked me to wait outside, I went into the corridor and stood very still and said to myself, Lenora, hold on. At the hospital, I asked to speak with the attending physician privately. I told him my concerns. I showed him the lab report on my phone. I described the pattern, the Sunday broth, the 11-week rhythm of decline. He stared at the report for a moment. Then he called another physician in. They ran a full independent toxicology panel. Results came back the following morning. The doctor's face when he came to find me told me everything before he spoke a word. There were traces of a slow-acting hepatotoxic compound in Howard's bloodstream, present in quantities that could not be explained by his medications or his diagnosed condition. Is there anyone with regular unsupervised access to his food? He asked. Yes, I said, and I have documentation. The police went to the estate that same afternoon. Mr. Haskell was with them. I waited in the hospital hallway with my hands folded in my lap, the way I had learned to wait for things that were outside my hands now. An hour passed, then Mr. Haskell called. He denied it at first, Mr. Haskell said. And then the officer played him the recording from your phone. The Sunday conversation. The part where he said, and I am reading from the transcript, it is important to be realistic, the doctors do not expect much more time. I waited. Combined with the lab results and your documentation, there was no room left. He stopped denying it. He said he panicked when Howard told him about changing the will. He said he only meant to make him appear sicker than he was, to delay the paperwork. I closed my eyes. He is in custody, Lenora, Mr. Haskell said quietly. I sat down on the nearest chair and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Howard recovered slowly. Without the compound entering his system, his body began to stabilize in ways the doctors had not expected. It took a few days to absorb what they were telling me. His heart condition was real, but it was manageable. The toxin had been accelerating the presentation of his symptoms, making him appear far closer to the end than he actually was. He was not going to live forever, but he was not going to die in 6 months either. The morning he sat up in bed on his own and asked for coffee and the newspaper, I stood in the doorway and felt something open up in my chest that I did not have a name for right away. He looked at me carefully. How long have you known? Long enough, I said. I wanted to be certain before I told you. He was quiet for a moment. He was like a son to me. I know. I do not understand it. Fear does strange things to people, I said, especially when they believe they are about to lose something they have built their whole identity around. I sat down beside him. That does not make it right. But it is what it was. Howard looked out the window at the frost still on the lawn. Then he said, Adelaide would have figured it out before week 3. Then she was a smarter woman than I am, I said. He shook his head slowly. No, I think you two would have gotten along very well. We stayed like that for a while, not needing to fill the quiet between us. 3 months later, Howard stood in the main hall of the estate and announced the creation of the Adelaide Davenport Foundation for Organ and Kidney Disease Research. The bulk of his estate, he said, would be directed there upon his passing. In the meantime, the foundation would begin funding transplant assistance immediately for families who could not afford what insurance would not cover. Clara was the first name on that list. She got the call on a Wednesday morning. She telephoned me so fast I barely had time to answer. She was crying too hard to form words for a full minute. When I finally understood what she was saying, I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed my hand flat against the wood grain and breathed slowly until I could speak. "You are going to be all right," I told her. "Mum," she said, "what did you do?" "I paid attention," I said, "that is all." Clara had her transplant 8 weeks later. The surgery was long and her recovery was harder than any of us wanted, but she has always been stubborn in the quiet way that matters most. The day she walked out of the rehabilitation centre on her own, I drove down to meet her, and she held on to me in the parking lot for a long time without saying anything. "You saved my life," she said finally. "You would have found a way yourself," I said. "You would have done it better." She pulled back and looked at me the way she has looked at me since she was a little girl, like she is trying to decide whether she believes me. "Are you happy up there? In that big house?" I thought about it honestly, the way Howard had taught me to think about things without rushing toward an easy answer. "I am," I said, "I really am. Howard and I never set out to love each other. That was not the agreement we made, but somewhere between the early mornings on the back porch with coffee going cold between our hands, and the long evenings, when he told me about Adelaide, and I told him about 30 years of other people's questions I had patiently answered, and the weeks when I was so frightened I could barely keep my voice level, and he held my hand without asking why. Something happened that neither of us had planned for. It did not arrive all at once. It did not announce itself. It simply settled in the way something true and quiet settles. We are not a love story in the way people expect. We are two people who made an honest agreement and then exceeded it in every direction. Declan received his sentencing the following spring. I did not attend the hearing. There was nothing I needed to see there. I did write a letter to the court stating that I believed in accountability and also in the possibility of genuine change. Howard wrote one as well. He needed to write it. I understood that even when it was hard to watch. Some things you cannot put down until you name them properly. I think about my 31 years at the library sometimes, about all the people who came in with questions they did not know how to ask, searching for answers in a place they had been told held answers. I always said the same thing to them. The most important skill is not finding the answer. It is knowing which question to ask and refusing to give up until you find it. I did not save Howard because I am brave. I am not particularly brave. I saved him because I am patient and I pay attention, and I have never once believed that a problem becomes smaller if you look away from it long enough. I saved him because I started a notebook and I kept it faithfully, and I did not wait for someone else to do the hard thing first. If you are in a situation right now where something feels wrong and you are afraid and you do not know what to do, I want to tell you this: start by writing it down. Write down what you see. Write down the dates and the times and the small details that seem insignificant, because the details that seem small are almost never small. Then find the one person who has no reason to protect the wrong side and tell them. Do not stay silent to keep the peace. Silence does not keep the peace. It only ever protects the wrong people. I never imagined I would be standing in a stone house in upstate New York at 63, watching my husband tend his rose garden on a Saturday morning, knowing that my daughter is going to be all right. I did not plan for any of this. I just showed up, and I paid attention, and I refused to look away. That turned out to be enough. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. Would you have acted sooner? Would you have been afraid to pick up that phone? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe, because stories like mine happen every day in ordinary houses to ordinary people. And ordinary people, I have learned, are capable of extraordinary things when someone they love is on the line.